For Family by Nunuk888. Chapter 13. When Demons Pray. I don't see anyone, came Han's insistent voice that was equal exasperation and alarm. Where did he go? Leia demanded. Who? There's no one else here. R2, you sure you didn't project something? There was an objectionable splat from the droid. Their raised voices reached Luke down the corridor even before he had arrived at Leia's rooms. He walked in to find them brandishing blasters, instantly drawing their attention with his movement. Luke! Leia cried, snatching her blaster up as she recognized him. I almost shot you! Can you sense him? You must be able to. Evil, monstrous! Han watched anxiously as Luke calmly walked right up to Leia and placed a hand on her blaster, lowering it firmly until it was pointing at the floor. He's not here, he said in a voice that was so soothing that even Han felt somewhat appeased. He didn't know that Luke was infusing it with the Force. Who's not here? Han asked as he followed suit and lowered his own weapon. He was right in front of me, Leia insisted, quieter now but still peering into every corner of the room. I saw him, his eyes, they were glowing in the lightning. I know, I saw it too. It was a vision, nothing more. It wasn't real. Not real! She shook her head, trying to escape the fiendish image still smoldering on the inside of her eyelids. Hey! Han interrupted emphatically, waving his blaster like a flag to catch their attention. Care to share? Who are you talking about, and what visions? Luke shared a glance with Leia, wordlessly confirming in that one look how much he could reveal. We discovered on Geonosis that Leia has some sensitivity to the Force. They both sensed Han's distinct exasperation before he stuffed his blaster back in the holster slung on his hip. Oh, right, the Force, he drawled in cynical exaggeration before rolling his eyes and muttering to himself. I'm out of it for a little while and everyone gets delusions of grandeur. Leia planted her fists on her hips. I didn't choose. No, it's great, Han interrupted with obviously fake, overblown enthusiasm. You both have this Force stuff, and you can both be Jedis together. That's just peachy. Look, I just remembered I have to go look over the Falcon, make sure R2 hasn't done any permanent damage. R2 didn't waste any time in bleeping his denial, and who knows what Lando's done or her. I'll catch you both later. He was gone before either of them could say another word, with R2 rolling after him in a flurry of affronted electronic beeps. Leia's confused, anxious gaze lingered on the closed door. She very nearly went after him, but then she sighed heavily and simply began gathering up the data chips, which had been scattered in the commotion. Luke waved a hand, and all the data chips flew up in an arc to arrange themselves into 3 neat piles on the table. Are you alright? He asked. Yes, I'm fine, she replied automatically, distracted as her eyes followed the floating path of the small chips. She caught herself and shook her head. Actually, no, I'm not alright. What was that? A Force vision. I was meditating. You must have been caught in the flow. You saw what I saw. He hesitated, but decided openness was best. Father saw it too. She ignored that last part. Do you see them often? No. The last time was when you and Han were on Cloud City. It's a possible future, nothing more. It seems so real, she murmured. He nodded. Sometimes they're fleeting images. Sometimes there are also voices and sounds, or other sensations. It's what Father saw when he had repeated dreams of our mother dying. Her face clouded over. She had let it slide once, but not twice. I know how you feel about Vader, and I know you're trying to get me used to the idea, but just don't, okay? Luke raised his palms in acquiescence. Leia went back to the data chips, searching for the one she'd been about to read when Palpatine's hideous image had burned through her mind. Leia, Luke started quietly. She didn't like that tone. Last time it had been an omen of her whole world being turned on its head. She ignored him and continued flicking through the data chips. I have to teach you to shield yourself. It'll protect you from inadvertently seeing other visions, but more importantly, not now, Luke, she cut in. I can just ignore the visions. There's so much to do before the strategy meeting. Luke gave no reply. Seconds later, she almost leapt out of her own skin when she saw him in her mind. She was instantly reminded of that moment after they had flown away from Cloud City, when she had felt Luke in her mind and known instinctively where he was. Only this was far more intense, as if he existed as a small particle in her head and was staring right back at her. Everything that made him Luke, His steadfastness and compassion, even the tranquility that she had always felt pervading the air around him, but which she could now see stretching far into the forest as an incandescent presence, were all right there in her mind. I can't tell you enough how important it is that you learn to conceal yourself in the Force. It was Luke's voice, as if she could hear it in her ear, but without words or sounds, his meaning and earnestness crystal clear. Without shielding, anyone who can control the Force will see you as you're seeing me now. You need to learn to shield yourself and your presence. In time, I can teach you so much more, but for now, this cannot wait. She felt him fade from her awareness until she was blinking and staring at him in a way with which she was much more familiar. She had never thought the physical world would feel so hard and flat, as if there was no depth. I was seeing you in the Force, she murmured, finally understanding what he had told her about seeing Vader. Was it really only earlier that same day? Already it felt like such a long time ago, as if she had aged since learning who her biological father was. With that fresh reminder, all of a sudden it was imperative that she learn this shielding. Palpatine's inhuman yellow eyes were still emblazoned in her mind, but there was another who provided even more incentive for her to conceal herself. She didn't waste time dwelling on what Vader might have already seen. If it was within her capabilities to block him from any further advantages by way of the Force, she would take it. She firmly brushed aside the data chips and turned to her brother. What do I do? Admiral, Garant called urgently from a communications console. Piet spared a furtive fleeting glance out of the viewports at the Reaper passing within a scant few hundred meters of them, but he couldn't see from this position whether it was the news he had secretly been waiting for. He marched smartly down the command walkway of the Executor's bridge. Yes, Commander. We were monitoring internal communication aboard the Reaper as ordered, sir. Large explosions were reported in multiple engine banks in the last few minutes. If Piet's lips gave the smallest twitch, nobody noticed. Contact Grand Moff Kine for a full update, he ordered. Before Garant could relay the order, the communications officer was already turning eagerly towards them. Sir, we have a priority signal from the Reaper. He's hailing us, Piet mused. Very well, put him through. Moments later, a life-size hologram of the Grand Moff of Over Sector Outer appeared on the bridge. Where is Lord Vader? He demanded instantly. Grand Moff Kine, Piet greeted with a polite nod. Lord Vader is not to be disturbed at this present time, but I will relay your report. You are, I presume, contacting us with regards to the explosions aboard your ship? Kine's usually lined face was furrowed with even deeper lines of aggravation, his non-regulation wavy gray hair disheveled as if it had been raked repeatedly by frustrated fingers. You don't sound surprised, Admiral. Piet's face arranged itself into a perfect expression of patient tolerance. I would be ill-qualified for my position if I was surprised at every piece of information, Grand Moff. Unless, he added mildly, you meant something quite different? Kine was visibly fuming. Since receiving the top-secret dispatch from the Emperor awarding him the honor of enforcing security with the Reaper at the treaty ceremony, he had been in a near-childish state of anticipation. He didn't belong on the distant fringes of the Empire tidying up after Tarkin's death. His place was at the forefront, with Palpatine spearheading Imperial visions and politics. Palpatine had hinted that the Executor would be assigned elsewhere during the ceremony, and Kine could only imagine Vader of being jealous at being passed over for the key role. And now Kine's chances of traveling to Naboo were all but ruined, and no matter how suspicious he might be of Piet being involved with the explosions to default the honor back to Vader, there wasn't a shred of evidence. Yet. And he couldn't point fingers at Vader's favored admiral on just a hunch. I only meant that you are well informed, Kine ground out. All hyperdrive propulsion systems have been wiped out, and first indications are that they will need significant repairs, if not entire replacements, to restore hyperspace travel. The Reaper will be stranded at Eriadu for the next few days at the very least. If you're in need of additional engineers, there are several within Lord Vader's inspection teams currently on board your ship, Piet suggested helpfully. They have my clearance to assist your men. What caused the explosions?
It's too early to be certain, but such coordinated damage can only be sabotage. Ken growled, glaring at the Admiral. My men are investigating as we speak. We will discover who is behind this, I assure you.
I'm sure the Emperor will accept nothing less, Kent replied smoothly, his deadpan expression giving nothing away. But I must say it's fortunate that you're currently not employed on any significant assignments, isn't it? Kent stared, stupefied. Was the Admiral really innocent? Or did the man just have the audacity to dangle the proverbial carrot in front of his face?
Yes, it isn't, was all that he could say, having been constrained from discussing the matter by the Emperor himself.
Lord Vader will want a full update at his convenience. May I suggest that you keep me informed of progress with the investigation and repairs?
Kane bristled. He was the superior in rank, but Piet answered to Vader, which gave him clout. Of course, he snapped before terminating the connection. There was a wet sound of slurping air. The remainder of the fleet can be concealed in the shadow of Dargul. From there, it is a short hyperspace jump to Naboo. Akbar had arrived amidst the recent recruitment drive courtesy of Rikino and the Emperor's continuing atrocities. Han only knew him by reputation, and the little he had heard from Leia in the minutes before the strategy meeting. Experienced in command with a history of creative victories, Akbar was greatly respected amongst his people. As soon as he had been appointed the Supreme Commander of the Alliance fleet, he had begun tackling the monumental task of unifying the many splintered groups from all the existing squadrons and the starfighters brought along by the rebellion's new allies, to the substantial number of Mon Calamari star cruisers that Akbar himself had brought, as well as those warships either donated or financed by Vader. Most traffic passes between Umgul and the Anarch run, so they should be able to avoid detection by Imperial ships, Akbar continued. Han had seen his fill of the weird and wonderful during his extensive travels, but this Alliance strategy meeting won the surreal stakes hands down. His eyes drifted to Mothma's hologram at one end of the table, flanked by Maydeen, Riken, and Fishhead in similar monochrome blue. The other half of the circle was completed by those physically sitting in the conference room made available to them by the Khalidahin. Leia, himself, Chewie, Luke, and who else but their new best buddy Darth Vader dominating the opposite end of the table. R2 had parked himself on Vader's other side opposite Luke, and Goldenrod tottered around behind everyone as per his usual anxious self. Despite being heavily outnumbered by Alliance members, Vader seemed to balance out the lot of them by his sheer presence. And they were all sitting there politely discussing stealth tactics of the Rebel Alliance fleet over cups of herb tea. It was every bit as natural as it would have been for 3PO to strike up a new career as a smooth-talking, trigger-happy smuggler. 2 Star Destroyers routinely patrol that region, Vader warned as he began tapping something into his comlink. The ranking captain is partial to senseless destruction, and may not abide by the current ceasefire. Your ships should stay well out of range of their sensors. Han almost laughed outright at hearing Vader warning them to stay clear of troublesome imps, and only just managed to curb it into a snort.
Do they follow a particular schedule, Lord Vader?
Mothma asked, ignoring the rude interjection. Vader tucked his comlink away. My Admiral will forward you the data, Chief Mothma.
That is much appreciated,
she acknowledged. We will remain concealed as much as possible, Akbar said in the clipped speech typical of his race. But what if the Superstar Destroyer from Eriadu? That would not be easy to evade. The Reaper has been taken care of, Vader replied with finality. It will not make an appearance at Naboo in the immediate future. Luke and Leia exchanged glances. They weren't the only ones looking surprised, although skepticism might have been the more prominent emotion in the others. Your ships will need to move into position quickly, Admiral, Vader continued. Palpatine is making his move. Whatever he has planned, it will be imminent. Good, Han chirped. I hate long waits.
Mothma continued as if Han hadn't spoken. Have you received more intel, Lord Vader?
Not in such plain terms. All I have gathered from my intel network is that the Imperial retinue is arranging his journey to Naboo for the ceremony. But there are other indications. Do you currently have any ships in the Model sector, most noticeably in the proximity of the outermost forest moon of Endor?
There were blank looks all around. Not to our knowledge,
Mothma answered. I thought not. Palpatine has ordered me there to fight off a supposed rebel attack, but I believe it is merely a ruse to have me engaged elsewhere during the signing ceremony when he acts.
Mothma frowned. We would appreciate some clarification, Lord Vader. Why would he want you engaged elsewhere?
Because he knows I will oppose him.
Her eyes widened a fraction, the only indication of her alarm. Has he mentioned this?
It is the way of the Sith,
He replied. Seeing their confusion, he tried to explain.
the relationship, for want of a better word, between a Sith master and his apprentice would appear strange to many. It is custom that when the apprentice is powerful enough in the ways of the dark side, he or she takes the master's life. In a way, it can be argued that the master's greatest triumph is the moment of his or her death, when the apprentice they have trained is worthy to take the title of master and continue leading the Sith Order. I would wager that Palpatine is actually disappointed that I have not already succeeded in killing him.
I see, Mothma said, although her tone suggested otherwise. And what is it that he would want protected in Endor? In the slight pause before he replied, the tension in the room notched up higher for reasons most of them couldn't understand. Luke and Leia felt the gravity emanating from the black-armored figure before he replied.
It is the current construction site of the Empire's most monstrous creation, the second Death Star.
Everyone froze. Then, as one, their gaze was drawn to Leia and Riken, who had both paled considerably. Oh, goodness me! By the 9 Sithing hells, Han mumbled. A crease appeared between Mothma's brow. I had heard rumors from our Bothan spies, but it had not been confirmed. How far along is the construction?
I am not certain. Palpatine has been keeping me away from the project for reasons which are now becoming clear. I suspect he plans to use it, so he would have prioritized the primary weapons development. But the fact that he is sending me to secure it and return with it to Coruscant indicates it is not yet entirely useful. It may not be complete yet, but neither should we underestimate its capabilities.
And those are?
The second Death Star is designed to be over 5 times the size of the first, and its armament is proportionally greater. The super laser will also be more powerful, with a greater reach.
An uneasy silence fell on the group. What will you do? Luke asked. Vader shook his head, a gesture of uncertainty that few in the room had ever seen from him.
As you know, I had intended to challenge Sidious on Coruscant prior to the treaty signing, but this forces me to reconsider. We must secure the Death Star to keep it out of his hands, and only I personally could be certain of obtaining clearance to board and gain control of the station. But that would leave me too far away for too long when he acts, which is exactly his intention.
Han leaned over to Chewie and whispered, Sidious? Luke overheard the question. Darth Sidious is Palpatine's Sith name, he supplied quietly, but loud enough for the benefit of any others present who were wondering the same.
Riken was scowling darkly as he leaned forward. However we decide to proceed, the Death Star must not endanger civilian lives.
His voice brooked no compromise, steeled from the years of pain over his homeworld's destruction and his failure to warn his people of the blast that had ended the lives of 2 billion of his fellow Alderaanians.
I don't like it, Madine grumbled. If Palpatine knows that Vader has sided with the Alliance, why would he give him a chance to gain control of the Death Star? You're right to be suspicious, General,
Vader replied, surprising the man with his agreement.
I can't make sense of it yet, but there's no doubt that it would serve his purpose in some way.
Maybe he's going to use the Death Star to blow up your ship when you get there, Han suggested.
No,
Vader refuted immediately.
He is planning something more. If his aim was only to kill me, he would not waste the executor. He would have simply summoned me to Coruscant.
Right, and then his exalted wrinkledness would have just popped you off, Han said sarcastically.
His exalted wrinkledness,
Vader echoed, making Han grin.
Is more powerful than you could imagine. You would be wise not to underestimate him. He managed to conceal his true nature from the Jedi his whole life, even when he was the Senator of Naboo and the Supreme Chancellor.
Lord Vader, Mothma stepped in, are you absolutely certain that he will act on his plans at the signing ceremony?
Yes, he replied bluntly.
And what is it that he aims to achieve? She pressed.
Palpatine has 2 immediate objectives. One is obvious, to destroy the Rebel Alliance. The other, the consequences could be far more devastating.
Anakin hesitated, unsure of how much his son would want revealed to his friends, but Luke's soft words answered for him. He's after me. Han's short laugh cut into the uncertain pause that followed. Yeah, when Hutt's right swoops, he smirked.
but his confident grin faded when Luke remained grim. You can't be serious. Look, kid, don't take this the wrong way or anything, but you're thinking too much of yourself. Unfortunately not, Vader replied gravely. Darth Sidious is after a new apprentice.
Another apprentice?
Mothma murmured in shock.
To replace me, not another,
Vader clarified.
He abides by the rule of 2. At any one time there is only one master and one apprentice. More would only serve to exacerbate infighting and treachery.
But what about the Emperor's hands, like that Mama Jade? Reagan asked.
There are many hands and other agents with varying degrees of sensitivity to the Force, but they are far from being Sith in both instruction and potential. The selection of a Sith apprentice is a serious undertaking. It must be one who will prove worthy of the considerable time and effort required for the training.
And that would be Luke, Han said dubiously, still not able to get his head around the idea that the so-called almighty walking corpse was specifically after his young friend. Anakin could also sense the uncertainty in the Alliance leader, and it was crucial for them not to underestimate the gravity of the matter. He fixed his masked gaze on Han, intent on removing all doubt.
Luke's sensitivity to the Force is surpassed by only a handful in the thousands of years of the history of the Jedi Order. He already wields great power, and he hasn't yet reached his full potential. Even on Cloud City, barely trained, he held his own against me. He may one day become the most powerful Jedi the galaxy has ever seen.
All of this acclaimed sensitivity to the Force wasn't enough to regulate the blood flow to his face, and Luke knew from the sudden heat in the room that he probably resembled the color of Tatooine's twin sunset. It was like the Freedom Chronicles all over again. Really, being a proud father was one thing, but did he have to be so vocal about it? Under less brave circumstances, Luke would have been having serious words with his father. Company be screwed! Medine stared at the polite, modest young man, looking for all the world as if he wanted the palace master rock to swallow him up whole as Vader extolled his praises, and he shook his head in bafflement.
You're saying that Palpatine is trying to turn Luke into, forgive the expression, but someone like you. How does that even work?
Luke jumped on the opportunity to steer the conversation into less embarrassing waters. Have you heard of the Force? Whether or not you believe in it, he added when he saw Han open his mouth. Han promptly closed his mouth. Everyone nodded. Very simply put, Luke explained, the Force, in part, enhances what you are, giving greater awareness, abilities, and insight. But there are two sides to it. The Jedi use the light side of the Force, and for thousands of years they were the guardians of peace and justice in the galaxy. The Sith are on the other extreme. They use... Oh, let me guess, the dark side? Han smirked. Yes, Luke confirmed, not at all perturbed by his friend's cynical tone. The dark side is very different.
The dark side corrupts.
Even Vader's vocalizer sounded unusually somber.
Great power is easily within reach, but it is a twisted, malevolent energy that fills you, consumes you entirely until there isn't even a shadow of your former self. Until you're nothing but a vessel of darkness.
Is that what happened to you? Medine asked suggestively.
I am not here to speak of myself,
Anakin said with finality.
Suffice to say, Darth Sidious seeks a new apprentice. He deems me too weak.
That was certainly a shocking idea. But then, so was the suggestion that the mild-mannered Luke that they all knew could be more powerful than the formidable Darth Vader. Let me get this straight. Vader's going to be far away someplace while Luke is swallowed up by this dark side stuff. That's the old coot's plan. Sounds like a load of mind muffins to me, Han mumbled, slouching down in his seat. Wait, doesn't that make 3? Medine asked. If Lord Vader's elsewhere, then there would be 3 Siths, did you call it?
The term is Sith Lord, or Dark Lord of the Sith. Palpatine will not succeed, but yes, if his plan was to come to fruition, there will be 3 Sith Lords for a time. It appears that he is more confident of turning Luke to the dark side, if I am not present to hinder him. No doubt he then intends to send Luke to destroy me, as well as the Rebel Alliance.
All eyes swung to Luke, who squirmed at the attention. I'm not going to join him, he objected in an offended tone. "We know, Luke," Leia murmured, speaking for the first time as she reached over and gave his hand a squeeze. The familiar gesture was perfectly natural in view of their relation, but Han read it in an entirely different light and looked away. Perhaps the simple touch gave Leia some strength, or reminded her that the shocking discovery which had shattered her entire world had had a silver lining. Whatever it was, she now drew herself up in her seat, and for the first time since Vader had stepped into the conference room with the others, she looked at him with her usual assertive authority. How might Palpatine go about trying to turn Luke into his apprentice? Anakin's momentary pause at being addressed by Leia was only understood by the two of them and Luke. He could read nothing from her. Luke's short lesson on shielding had obviously done its job. Leia's thoughts had always been closed to him, whether through her innate force potential or the self-regimented control during her years in politics. But now her force presence also appeared as alive as a scalefish in the Dune Sea. For her concealment from Palpatine, he was immensely glad, but it would have helped if he could sense her mood even a little.
There are many possibilities,
Anakin replied, wishing he could speak to her without the vocalizer.
but to exert the greatest influence, Luke would need to be in the same room.
Luke anticipated the response building in many of those around him. "But I can't just stay away. I'll need to be there with Lord Vader to stop him." "You don't have to go," Han insisted. "Let Vader take care of the ugly scumbag." Luke shook his head. "We only have one chance at this. Palpatine is powerful. Together, Vader and I can defeat him. Alone, we may not succeed. And that, we can't afford." "And you can't turn into Vader," Han urged, surprising Anakin with the intensity of his concern for Luke. "I won't," was Luke's assured reply. Han continued glowering unhappily as an uncomfortable silence fell. Luke was right. They had to go with Vader to confront Palpatine. But they didn't have to like it. "So the two things we can't change," Leia summed up, "are that Lord Vader must secure the Death Star as soon as possible, and he also needs to be present at the signing ceremony. Would it make sense, then, for the Alliance to question one of the terms of the treaty and make an official motion to postpone the ceremony for a few days until it's resolved?"
Palpatine would be suspicious,
Riken said. "He'll be suspicious anyway," Leia replied. "But he'd be hard-pressed to sign a treaty by himself."
"That is that,"
Riken conceded with a grim smile. There was unanimous agreement, and with that the Alliance leaders returned to more familiar discussions of ship deployment and assault strategies. Leia leaned on the doorframe, her senatorial mask firmly in place as she watched Han packing, or what was presumably his closest imitation of packing, the surprisingly large number of things he had managed to clutter the small room with in such a short space of time. So far, everything just appeared to be accumulating into a jumbled pile in the middle of the floor. His voice floated out from the small cabinet where his upper body was currently buried. "Just stay with Luke and you'll be fine. I'd leave Chewie with you, but he's been stuck to me like titanium mesh tape ever since I came out of that slab. You'd think he thought I'd died or something. Ah!" He emerged from the cabinet, flourishing a greasy power core release valve like a trophy. It was soon tossed carelessly onto the growing pile of clothes, tools, and various other things she could only consider as junk before he delved under the bed for another last item. Leia stared at the seat of his pants for another few seconds as he continued burrowing before she gave up trying to speak to his face. "Why did you volunteer?" "What?" He backed out from under the bed, sitting on the floor as he looked up at her with his hair in complete disarray. "Come again?" "Why did you volunteer?" she repeated, her face and voice carefully neutral. Han looked at her so intensely for a moment that she thought he would answer seriously, but then he cracked a lopsided grin, and she knew she'd only received some flippant remark. "2 words, sweetheart. General and 13 Executor 50.X engines," he finished in a rush. "Did you really have to ask? It's not every day that His Amiable Dark Lordness offers a personal tour of the Executor's engines without binders, I might add." He ducked back under the bed. Leia chewed her lip, wanting to say so much and yet unable to voice a single word of it. Mothma had called for an Alliance task force to accompany Vader to secure the Death Star, and Han, of all people, had volunteered to lead it. For reasons she couldn't begin to fathom, all the other leaders had agreed to the appointment, and by the end of the strategy meeting, Han had been conferred General Solo. Considering who Vader was, the two of them on Vader's ship, even with Chewie as backup, could not be a good combination. But what could she say? She could hardly tell him the truth. Well, there was a certain truth that she could reveal, if she could bring herself to admit it, that was. His life eventually won out over her pride.
I don't want you to go.
Han, as much as she could say of him anyway, froze before he emerged again. He looked at her strangely, as if he wasn't quite sure that he'd heard correctly, before looking away.
I think I should, he said, oddly subdued.
This baffling response only added to his increasingly strange behavior that had started soon after he'd been rescued on Geonosis. Had the freezing process changed him somehow? She couldn't shake the nagging sense that he seemed to be trying to avoid her.
Han, what's wrong?
She threw him a look the likes of which she had never seen from him. Disbelief crossed with pain, thrown in with a glint that seemed to scream, "Isn't it obvious?" And all of that delivered through such a stare as if the very sight of her haunted him. Was it even possible to convey so much in one look? She almost thought she imagined it all, but it struck her that this might be the first clear window she'd had to his true feelings in a long while. Perhaps from as far back as when she'd confessed her love for him amidst the carbon vapors on Cloud City. Whatever his response might have been, it was cut off by the blink of her comlink. Leia had to fight the sudden desire to crush the offending device for interrupting at such a critical moment before snatching it from her belt. "Yes," she snapped. She sensed who it was before Luke's voice came through. "Leia, do you have a moment?" "Not just now," she replied, but Han had already given up searching for whatever item he had lost and was stuffing the messy pile in the middle of the floor into the holdall that had been buried underneath it all. "It can't wait," Luke's voice pressed from the comlink. "Don't let me hold you up," Han said as he headed for the door. The strain in his voice had nothing to do with the overspilling bag that he hauled with him. He almost breezed right past her, but his legs paused of their own accord in the doorway beside her, standing so close to her that they breathed the same air. Just for a moment, all his bravado and bluster faded away, and he gazed deep into her eyes. He leaned towards her, gave her a lingering kiss on the forehead before abruptly scampering away. "Later, Leia. We'll be back before you know it." He disappeared around the far corner of the long corridor, only for his head to pop back into view just long enough to yell, "And make sure R2 doesn't make any more changes to my ship!" She stared at the vacant space his head had been for long seconds, utterly bewildered by what had just happened, before sighing in resignation and speaking into the comlink again. "Where are you, Luke?" Leia was not pleased. In fact, she was livid. She wasn't sure if she was even allowed to feel that way anymore, what with all this dark side business, but she briefly permitted herself the luxury since Luke was there to calm her down again. "I have nothing to say to you," she snapped, eyes flashing as she glared at the deathly mask staring down at her from the other side of the white, sparsely furnished room. It hadn't been Luke who wanted to speak to her at all. It was Vader, who not only interrupted what Han might have revealed, but who hadn't even had the courtesy to contact her himself. A voice in the back of her head pointed out that they all knew she would have ignored any message from Vader, but she quelled it swiftly. He had been given no invitation to address her outside of official Alliance business. "Leia," Anakin started. "No! You! Don't call me that!" Her anger swelled. It was a continuation of the build-up from years of hating Darth Vader, but it had gained in potency since her awakening on Geonosis. Right then, it particularly resembled a drag axe, working itself up into a berserker frenzy, and she was suddenly afraid that she would put on an abrupt growth spurt and transform into the towering monster where she stood. Even shielded in the Force as she now was, Luke could still read the subtle expressions on her face, and he stepped towards her, a silent anchor of support, giving her the conviction she needed to mentally shove her anger away. But there was nothing to take its place, and she was left suspended over a void, unarmed for the confrontation. "Father says you remind him of our mother." Luke's unexpected words certainly grabbed her attention, if that was his intention. Her reflexive rejection of the term father warred with a sudden explosion of curiosity. "Our mother?" Luke smiled, although his eyes were tinted with sadness. "Queen Padme Amidala." Her jaw dropped. A moment later, she snapped her mouth shut and raised an arched brow. "You can't fool me that easily," the gesture said.
"It is the truth,"
came Vader's solemn confirmation. She continued to study Luke's face for the answer, not willing to trust Vader even if it was logical that he would know more about it. The realization that Luke wasn't pulling her leg was a long time coming.
Queen Amidala?
Luke nodded.
Of Naboo?
Another nod. Blindsided, that's how she felt. Ever since learning that she was adopted, she had wondered at her biological parents. But Queen Amidala? Leia had studied Amidala's career closely and knew she was venerated as a folk hero on Naboo. Leia herself greatly admired the young queen and senator for how she had freed her home planet from occupation and united its divided people, and for her unswerving stalwart defense of democracy in the waning days of the Old Republic. Already one of the most respected political figures in the galaxy by the time of her tragically young death at the end of the Clone Wars, Leia had wondered how different the last 20 years might have been had Amidala survived to campaign through the early years of the Empire. It wasn't until now, with recent revelations and her conversation with Vader in Theed, that she was coming to realize the true extent to which Amidala's death might have affected the political face of the galaxy today. No, not Amidala. Padme. Her mother. Leia's previous admiration took on a whole new meaning. She, together with Luke, were the guardians of her legacy. Unconsciously, she stood straighter. Luke saw the change come over her, knew she would be all right. "I'll be just outside," he said softly and let himself out. With her head high, she turned to Vader with cold, formal civility.
"You have 1 minute, Lord Vader. What is it you wished to say?"
Anakin reached for his helmet, but Leia stopped him.
"No, leave it. I don't wish to see your face."
If she felt any guilt over the harsh words, she didn't show it. Anakin lowered his arms again without argument. He didn't shy away from the sharp pain of her denial. No, he embraced it. He deserved far worse.
"Your Highness, I needed to speak to you before leaving for Endor,"
he started. But as he took in the sight of his daughter standing before him and grappled with the harrowing memories of one particular crime, words utterly failed him. She waited silently, coldly distant, but finally gave in and prompted him when she had counted to 30, and he had said nothing further.
"I am listening."
When she counted another 30 and there was still nothing forthcoming, she deemed she had given him his fair minute.
"That was almost disappointing, Lord Vader. I'm leaving. I wish you well on your mission to Endor."
She turned to the door, had taken a step, when something stopped her. She couldn't tell if it was a noise or some other sense that made her turn back, but whatever it was, when she cast her eyes over her shoulder at the towering form on the other side of the room, she saw the hand gripping the back of the only chair in the room. The infallible Darth Vader's head was bowed, his stance visibly tense, even underneath the armor. It had been a noise that she had heard after all. The start of a word choked up with emotion. As if her acknowledgement of his feelings made her receptive to more, she was suddenly awash with the overwhelming grief and pain rippling out from him. All the oxygen in the room rapidly seemed to disappear. Her shallow breath left her in the form of a single word.
"What?"
Anakin swallowed past the rock in his throat.
"What I did to you. What I feel. I can't describe."
He expelled a sharp breath and shook his head.
"Words aren't enough."
He turned to her, pinpointing her in a gaze so intense that she could feel it even through the black mask.
If I could turn back time, if I could start over, if it was in my power, there are no words."
Tears sprang unbidden to her eyes. This was no elaborate speech, no artful apology, only genuine heartfelt remorse, glaring, raw, and intense through his broken words. As if captured in a trance, he stepped slowly towards her, his trembling hand floating towards her face as if drawn there by invisible strings.
"You're the very image of your mother. So strong, so brave, the most remarkable, the most beautiful soul. She would have been so proud of you."
The hot pool gathering in her eyes spilled over her lashes, and a tear trickled down her cheek. The tip of a gloved finger brushed it away, the touch softer than a feather. They stared at each other, the silence filled with so much hurt, such a yearning to reach out and bridge the gap between them,
Something snapped in Leia. She sprang away from him, jaw and fists clenched tight. What kind of twisted magic was this, where she almost forgot all that he had done? Her voice dripped venom. Your crimes are beyond forgiveness. No amount of clever words and emotional ploys will heal the scars you have forged with your darkness and evil. With the blade firmly driven into his heart, she lifted her chin higher and gave it a ruthless twist. My father is Bail Organa. He was a man of honor and worthy of my respect, and I will forever hold true to his memory. Anakin's hand lowered slowly to his side. She sensed his changing demeanor, even before she saw his stance stiffen and heard his vehement words.
You and Luke are everything, my very reason for living. I will never harm either of you again. I'll do everything in my power, everything, to protect you and give you a better galaxy to live in. Whether you accept it or not, Leia, you have my oath.
For an eternal moment he stared at her, his heart so full of love and pain that he thought it would burst. Then he was gone.